Welcome everybody. I'm Syd Field, and this is Screenplay, where everyone has a story to tell. Our guests today, Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden, filmmakers of the powerful film Half Nelson. Welcome, you guys.
Thanks for having us.
Half Nelson is a film of an idealistic history teacher caught in a stranglehold between drugs and the ideals of what he knows he wants and can be. Really, it's a struggle between a person who's caught between who he is and who he wants to become. Welcome to you guys. I was very, very impressed with Half Nelson because it touched so many spots within me. Tell me, this is your first film, or had you done another film before that?
This is our first feature, narrative feature. We've made shorts and documentaries in the past.
And you're from?
I grew up in Oakland, California, off the coast. I was born in Berkeley, and in and around the Bay Area for a while.
And then you gravitated to New York?
To New York about 10 years ago. I went to NYU undergrad film school, and been there ever since. Love it.
And Anna, where did you grow up?
I grew up in a suburb of Boston, and then headed to New York for school as well.
And you met at NYU?
I went to Columbia, actually, but I took a summer class at NYU where we met.
And were you both interested in doing the same kinds of things on film? You had ideas, of course. Were you interested in writing and directing in the beginning, or were you, for example, more interested in editing and writing?
I kind of started out being interested in nonfiction. And then as I met Ryan and started working with him, gravitated more towards fiction, but I'd still like to do some documentary.
Well, Half Nelson was so interesting to me because I've really in my own life had a similar, not quite so intense experience as a teacher starting out with screenwriting and not knowing what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be or so on. How long had you been nursing this idea, and what was the original source of the idea?
It's been a while. I mean, I think we wrote the first draft maybe 5 years ago. I always say 5 years. I don't know. I think it's about 4 or 5. But it was in the time leading up to the Iraq War, and we were going to protests a lot, and it felt like we were going to do something, make a change. I don't know if we thought we were going to prevent a war, but it just felt like people were being active, and it felt good. And then, nothing happened. That just kind of dissipated, and we went back to our lives and used our air conditioners again, and bought the corporate sneakers and all that stuff. But then we just got really excited about this idea of a character in the story, this guy who really wants to make a difference, but he's conscious of all the hypocrisy in his life and in the world. And
was this originally your idea, or did you both come up with the idea of the character and the circumstances together or individually?
We really developed it together. I mean, I sort of spit out a first draft that was pretty bad 5 years ago, and then Anna looked at it and we started talking about it, and she started giving her thoughts on it, and then pretty soon we were just writing it together.
Because it's so interesting. In the very first scene, we see him waking into consciousness with that insistent buzz of the alarm clock. And then we see him getting ready to go to school, and he gets into the classroom, and suddenly he's just a different person. And he talks about history in a way that I've never heard before, which is, what is history but change measured over time? And all the way through the film, and I've seen it several times now, all the way through the film you talk about change, you talk about whether it's external or individual change, you show different changing periods in American history, and it's such a wonderful metaphor for the film itself. Did you really constantly set out to make something that intense? And it was very subtle. I mean, I had to see that many, many times to get that impression. Did you start out with that intention of really showing a person caught in change?
I think that, yeah, we were interested in not somebody just caught in change, but somebody who's really wrestling with two different sides of himself, and lots of characters, not just Dan Dunn. And the history lessons kind of were a way to explore that, but we're also interested in somebody who's very conscious of these things and is trying to figure them out for himself. And so we use the history lessons as a way of, having this guy trying to explore the very things that he's going through and trying to make sense of them.
And how did you begin with the character? I'm very interested in terms of you have an idea of a character for Dan Dunn. How then did you begin to take that idea of character and begin to fashion it into a real, believable, live person? Because that's who he is.
Yeah, I don't know. These are the mysteries.
I don't want to put you on the spot or anything.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know how we did it, but yeah, you were gonna say.
Well, I think it helps when you have 4 years that you're developing a screenplay, and slowly over time the character becomes real for you, and the things that felt a little false at the beginning, slowly wear away, and you keep working on it and giving it different layers. I mean, I think time has a lot to do with the ability to make a character come real, at least for us.
Yeah, I've said before that one of the benefits of not having an agent or anybody asking you, to read your material is that you have time to just work on it. You have lots of time.
Well, did you start out with him being originally an idealist, a person who really has, and it's a new way of teaching. I've never been aware of teaching that kind of style of history, especially in a middle school, where it's so clear and it's so wonderfully evocative of what's been happening. I didn't know whether you started with that character because he's so rich, just as an idealist, or as a person who wanted to make some kind of a change but didn't know how to do it. That's what I wanted to find out. Where did you start? I mean, with him, with a biography, a family history?
Yeah, I mean, we did all that stuff. I don't know exactly where we started, but throughout the process, we would create a couple-page bio for him, where he grew up, different phases of his life, that kind of thing. But lost my thought. Sorry.
It's all right, we'll find it. Yeah,
it's gone. Oh, but yeah, the dialectic stuff, the stuff he's teaching in the classroom. We knew that we wanted him to be teaching history and sort of radical, progressive versions of history that aren't typically taught in a public school, 8th grade public school classes. And my dad actually, he has a website called dialecticsforkids.com, and it's just a hobby of his, dialectics and how to simplify this, what is thought to be really incredibly complex philosophy about how the world works, essentially. And he sort of just breaks it down into simple tools, and I thought it was really a fascinating thing to have this crack-addicted teacher kind of obsessed with.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you write the screenplay first? I know you made a short film called Gowanus, Brooklyn. Did you do that first, or write the script for that first, and then came Half Nelson? Or did the script of Half Nelson came first, and then you began working on Gowanus, Brooklyn as a sample of your work? Is that what happened?
Yeah, the feature-length film preceded the short film, and it was through the, like you said, the script did, but the concept for the feature-length film. And like you said, we didn't have anybody we didn't even know who to give it to try and raise money for it. So we kind of refashioned it into a short film which focused on Dre, who's kind of more of the supporting role in the feature film, made her the lead role in the short film, and really explored her character. And I mean, it was an amazing way to workshop not only that character, but also how we wanted to make the film, the style that we wanted to work in, and then go back into the script afterwards and use what we learned from the experiment of making the short film, and also hopefully gain some attention from it as well to be able to make the feature.
Because what I noticed in the film was the depth of characters. I mean, not only from Dre and the relationship between her mother, but between Frank and the relationship with Mike and everyone else in there. And his character was so sympathetic, Frank's. And that relationship between Dan and Frank was so interesting, I found, because on the one hand, I mean, this is where I guess the title comes in, Half Nelson. Did you ever wrestle before?
No.
Who found the title? That's what I want to know.
You came up with the title, right?
Yeah, it was weird. Like a long time ago, before we even had the idea for this, I probably should admit this. I was like, I bet Half Nelson would be a good name of a movie someday. And then we're like, hey, that could work for this. But
we used to have wrestling in the
we used to have
original
wrestling.
script. I mean, there used to be kind of, it was a little bit more, the metaphor was a little bit more obvious because there were people watching wrestling in the movie, just a little bit. And then we slowly kind of just like stripped that all away, and it just kind of became a little bit more esoteric as we developed the script more and more.
At some point we realized it was also a Miles Davis song that we tried to get for the movie, but proved to be too costly. But we actually there's a scene where he's at the bar and somebody's playing the trumpet, and we ended up cutting it out of the movie, but there's a moment where he says the song is called Half Nelson for when you're feeling kind of stuck. And it's actually in the trailer. It kind of opens up the trailer, but we thought it wasn't necessary. We just thought we'd go all the way with the metaphor and pull out all the references.
And after you did the short film, Go On Us Brooklyn, what happened then? I saw on a credit that it was developed in Sundance, the film. What did you do in Sundance? Did you develop the script there, or the short film, or work on the feature film? Tell us about the process of developing the film in terms of the Sundance experience.
Well, we made Go On Us. We played it at the festival in 2004, in January. And we met Michelle Satter, who runs the Sundance Institute over there, the lab programs. And she invited us to apply to the screenwriters lab. And we did, and we had been rejected several times before, so it was nice that she invited us to apply and knew about it this time. And we got in, and that was great. In the summer, we go up to Utah, and we were up there on Redford's Ranch, and it's just great. They have writers come up there, and they've all read your script ahead of time. And you just sit down in the mountains, and it's really like peaceful, and you just talk about it, and some stuff you learn and you can use when you go back to writing again, and other things aren't so helpful, but it's nice to talk to writers.
Was there one writer that you were working with, or several writers?
Several. There were, I think everybody is assigned like 5 writing advisors, and so which is great because some people really connect to the material and some people don't connect so much, and like that's fine, and it's nice to be able to talk. And for once you're talking with people who all they care about is like trying to help you make your script the best it can be. They're not worried about making a role more castable or making it more commercial, and so it's a really kind of great pure environment to work in.
And how long was the workshop in Sundance?
It's just the screenwriters lab was just a week, and then I think they have like a director's lab too, that after you've done the screenwriters lab you can go back to and actually workshop some of your scenes on video, which we never did because by the time of the following lab, the following summer, we were shooting, luckily. But I hear that's a great experience too.
And what significant changes, or any changes, did happen to the screenplay out of that Sundance experience? Did you change any characters, add new scenes, change a internal need or something?
I think the most significant thing was the brother. Is that right?
Yeah, we kind of went in there knowing that we wanted to do something about the Mike character, who used to play a much bigger role in an earlier version of the script in a kind of bizarre way. But he was actually much more connected to Dan Dunn, and we kind of knew that there was something a little bit wrong with that. And we went in there and kind of talked to the advisors about these changes that we thought we wanted to make, and they helped us figure out, that was in fact the right choice and how to do it. But specifically, other than that, Tony Drazen gave us that great idea.
Oh.
Yeah, that was really important to the script.
Yeah, Anthony Drazen was really helpful, and there was that scene at the end where she delivers the drugs to the motel room, and that didn't used to be there, and he was insistent that, like, if these two characters are going down this path, they have to cross in that kind of way at some point. We just thought it sounded too forced. It was like we didn't want to make that kind of movie. We wanted it to be subtle. We didn't want to have this sort of explosive moment where she's going to sell him drugs, the teacher drugs, and we thought, we just kept thinking about it And we figured out a way to make it work where like nobody says anything, and they just kind of both accept that this is the moment, and this is what they've become, and it was inevitable, and they're kind of almost at peace with it. And we thought that was the way to make it work.
But it took us a while to get there. I mean, when we were at the lab, we were like, "You're crazy. What are you thinking?" And then we got back, and we kind of thought about all the things that we had discussed during the lab, and you know, a month later, we were writing it, and we just like end up writing the scene. And you know, it took us a while to get there in our own way, but it was an incredibly important thing that kind of came out of that experience for us.
Yeah, I believe that screenwriting is finding places where silence works better than words. And that's an ideal representation when they two sit in that motel room or hotel room, looking at each other at the end, and she's literally saving him as he is willing to save her. You have this moment of look, this moment of recognition between the two actors that is so heartfelt and so moving and so emotional. So for me, the next scene where we see him and he's getting ready to shave off his beard, that to me was such a glorious moment because you can see the dynamics of change right there within his character. And that was absolutely wonderful to me for that. And you know, it was beautifully done, and the silence worked so effectively in those scenes. I mean, it's very, very powerful. When Sharika doesn't know what to say, she doesn't say anything. And that makes her more knowledgeable, more wise, a stronger character.
Yeah, I mean, it's those actors, you know, you got to give them a lot of the credit, because if they couldn't communicate, then you'd have to turn to the words, you know, to get it across. But fortunately, they could say so much without talking.
And that's one of the great things that we discovered in the editing room was that instead of, you know, a lot of times when you like put together a movie and you put everything together the way it is, and you let the scenes breathe and you have every scene in there, it's a lot longer than it should be when you put your first assembly together, which was the case with us. But we realized that, you know, we could take entire scenes out, and just because of the way that these two actors and three actors, really, Anthony as well, were able to communicate with so little dialogue, we realized we could really let the scenes breathe and just have fewer of them, you know.
Did that happen in the editing room or on the floor when you were shooting?
I think, you know, both. In a way, you know.
Mostly the edit room, though. I mean, I think there were scenes that we knew would probably get cut while we were shooting, but for the most part, it was afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you both worked, you edited a film, I know. Were you there all the time, or did you let her do a first cut? Or?
Yeah, I was there a lot, but she did a lot on her own. I mean, Anna was a machine in post. She was like working 21 hours a day. It was crazy, and so I wasn't going to be there that much.
Are you going to sit there and take that?
I was a machine.
She likes it.
No, I did like I worked when I get in the editing room, it's like I lose track of time totally. But he was there most of the time, and he'd sometimes try to backseat drive a little bit. But he unfortunately doesn't know how to push the button, so there wasn't too much.
He gave you just ideas and encouragement and support.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say, try this, and then I'd have a new idea, and then she'd be working on that, and then I'd be on to the next thing, and she'd be like, can I just do this?
Yeah. It takes a little time.
So you did make significant changes in the editing room and finding places where the film could breathe from the screenplay into the film project. Is that correct? In a way.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we always, I mean, because we learned a lot from the short film too, because the short film was the first time we'd worked with Sharika Epps, who plays Dre in the feature, and you know, how much she could communicate with her face was really, you know, amazing to us. And so I think that we kind of went back into the script after making the short and stripped away a lot of the dialogue, and then had to put some back when we wanted to get money to make the movie, because people were like, what's going on here? They exchange glances? How many times can they exchange glances in a screenplay? But then ended up like stripping it out again in the editing room.
And how did you find Sharika Epps? Because that's an amazing find in terms of an actress. I understand she did not work prior to that as an actress.
We just got very, very, very lucky. when we were looking for Dre for Gowanus, we just went to the nearest middle school in our neighborhood. We just walked around from junior high to junior high, and it was the first one we went to. And we talked to vice principals and drama teachers and encouraged their students to come to our audition, which was just a series of very casual conversations, just to see how comfortable they felt with us. And yeah, she came, and she had danced. She was at a performing arts school for dance, and she hadn't acted, but the drama teacher at the school had seen her perform dancing and thought she had such a great presence that he was like, I've got the girl for you, so we got to give that guy some credit.
Yeah.
John McEnany.
Yeah.
Was it MS-51?
MS-51, yeah.
MS-51. Would you kind of guess how many schools you went looking for her?
It's just a handful. We went to we called a lot of schools, but a lot of vice principals that weren't interested in, letting us come in and talk to their students for whatever reason, probably had way too much to deal with to bother having some kids coming in to cast a short film. But we only went to ended up going to 5 or 6, and there were only 2 of those where the drama teachers or the vice principals were really active in helping us get students, and so most of the short film was cast off of just those 2, because there are also other roles for students in the short film. It was cast just from those 2 schools.
But when it came time to make Half Nelson, it was 2 years later, and Sharika had moved away from Brooklyn. She'd moved upstate New York, and we hadn't seen her. So we thought she probably would be too old, because she was 13 when we made Gowanus, and she's still playing a 13-year-old for Half Nelson, but she was 15, and we weren't sure if she'd shot up. But fortunately, she was still the same physical size, very small, and but she matured a little bit, and I think she could handle some of the heavier stuff in the movie, I think, better than she could have at 13.
And did you go into classrooms to observe in terms of getting the feel of that classroom experience so you could film it the way you did?
A little bit. I mean, Anna used to work. You want to talk about?
I used to work in a school for a year in Seattle, but I also have a lot of friends who teach in New York City schools, and went into classes there when we were preparing for the film. And it was also really important for us to have Ryan go and Ryan Gosling and observe a class or 2, just so that he could get the sense of what teachers were competing with.
But one of the times he went to go sit in on the classroom, the word spread that it was the guy from The Notebook, and it turned into mayhem.
It was fine at first, but then it kind of, it did turn into mayhem, and the secretaries were asking him, printing out photos from IMDb and asking him for his autograph, and he's like, I can't go back there. But I think it was actually a really good experience for him, and he got he's a very detail-oriented actor, and he was able to pick up a lot of little details, like the rubber bands on his wrist, or, the small things that he would, trying to match well when he had an important lesson, just those little details.
Also wearing the bandage with the American flag on it, which I thought was stunning. It reminded me of Chinatown a little bit.
Yeah. That was the effect we were going for, just sort of this physical wound that he'd have for the last portion of the movie. But it was his idea to have the American flag. I said, people are going to make a lot of that. And he was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was great. It was just a great choice. Was the Dan Dunn character much in Gowanus? And who played that, if it wasn't, or was it Ryan?
It was, who played the Dan Dunn character in Gowanus was Mr. Light, who comes in at the end, the substitute teacher from the end. And he was a friend and also a teacher, a real teacher, when we cast him in Gowanus. And he had, he was the supporting role in it, but the scene where they meet in the bathroom, that scene, although it's very different in the feature, that was also the inciting scene for the short film.
Yeah, I mean, that scene where she finds him in the bathroom, he goes in. How did you structure that? I mean, you start in at the beginning of the scene when he calls to see whether anyone's in the women's bathroom. Then there's no one there. He goes in, goes out, gets his pipe, and starts smoking. And then you see that where she arrives, and he's aware of that. How did you go about structuring that? Did you just simply structure it as a just beginning, middle, and end of that scene?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because we wrote it. It's very different in the script from the way it played out in the movie.
How did you write it?
Which in the short film, it's written much closer to the way it played out in Gowanus, which is she comes in, they have kind of an exchange of dialogue. She says, "What are you doing?" He kind of plays it off. He tries to get out of the situation he's been caught in, but she knows something's happened. But in rehearsal, we were talking a lot with Ryan, and he had some interesting ideas about, you know, again, stripping out the dialogue and having more of a physical reaction that she witnesses. And it was just so much more intense, and the connection that they form in that moment is so much more real because of the intensity of the intimate situation that they go through.
And we love the idea that she has to kind of take care of him in that moment, you know, and how much more powerful that is for her. So
It also presages the end, too, where she comes looking for him at the motel.
yeah.
Because she has that dominant kind of, I call it a savior kind of a attitude about her that I found in the film that worked so effectively for me. And that one moment in the bathroom where Dan realizes that someone has come in, and he huddles up on top of the toilet, and his eyes look like a caught animal, really, who's being stalked, was so incredible there. And then, of course, she just steps right in and begins taking care of him. And that moment, I found, lingered throughout the entire film with me. Just because there was nothing said, but it was so powerful. You always knew from their acting point of view that that moment that they shared together was an amazing moment between both of them. And I feel it really led to the end where she went out looking for him. Because, again, this is an arena of choice right now. She can choose to go with Frank, or she can choose to go with Dan Dunn, basically. You know, she has a choice cut out for her. And she chooses that way to rescue him. That's our fade for today. Our guests have been Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden, filmmakers of Half Nelson.